We are concerned with this two-way dialogue between the agency and everybody who has a shared interest in drug development, whether it's professional associations, patients, healthcare providers, patient advocacy group, basically anybody who has a shared interest in drug development.
And I know you're a PharmD. We share in common that we have PhDs in pharmacology. You speak 5 languages. I'm almost fluent in English, so some similarities there. One quick question, what motivates someone to go work for the FDA?
The desire to serve the public and promote and protect public health. I think that's the main part. And it's very, we're all patients at some point. It's not like you are a patient and you're not. At some point, we are all patients. And really to serve the public and bring medicines to the market and be part of that evaluation is something that's truthfully amazing.
Cool. Now, I know you've got a deep passion about patients and patient centricity, and you've prepared a few slides. You want to share some thoughts with us? I'll give you the clicker.
And I'm going to disrupt the interview process.
No. Feel free. You can stand up, you can do whatever you want to do.
I probably feel more comfortable pacing
Absolutely.
around.
You can pace, dance, whatever.
So I would like to thank Valerie for having me here and being able to present some of my views on listening skills in drug development. And since I mentioned my views, I obviously have to put the obligatory disclaimer that our lawyers usually, just like your lawyers tell you, probably,
I'm good.
or your lawyer. So these views are my own and do not necessarily reflect the Food and Drug Administration's opinion. I mentioned before, I'm in PACE at the Office of the Center Director. Oh, it's down there too. Yep. So we have 4 teams, a safe use team, an engagement team, an education team, and just recently we have we formed a PFDD team, so a patient-focused drug development team. So you can see here the real importance we are putting on patient-focused drug development. And people can talk to me at meetings like this because we're non-regulatory presence within the regulatory structure. Like I mentioned before, our mission is really to provide a focal point for advocacy and promote two-way dialogue between the agency and any stakeholder that has an interest in drug development, drug safety, drug review. We are there for them. Now, having said that we are non-regulatory part of the agency, obviously the agency has a regulatory mission, which is translational medicine. So on one side, we have data that pharmaceutical companies bring to us that has certain uncertainties and risk associated with them. And on the other side, we have patients' hopes for new therapies, for better therapies that they can use for their disease. And we are the regulatory agency that kind of melts this together, reviews the data, and is concerned with health protection, health promotion, and obviously scientific and public education. Now, are we doing a good job in really fulfilling these hopes and promises for the patients? And if you look at the recent Forbes article with our approval ratings of NMEs is above 90%, it seems like we are doing that. But are we really getting to the patient's voice? And are we really making the medicine for the patient? So if you look at one of the recent papers, and I think one of my colleagues mentioned that yesterday, not many of the endpoints are really patient-centric. So we have clinical outcomes, clinical scales, and surrogate outcomes, but not really including the patient voice in clinical trials. And we have a wealth of expertise in our review team. So you see we have chemists, we have clinical pharmacologists, pharmacology, toxicologists, dietitians, clinicians, and a wealth of other people that write reviews and bring their expertise about study data into the review process and then collate all this information, make a determination whether it's safe and efficacious, and write the prescribing information. But where is the patient's voice in this process? So usually we don't have a patient's voice in this process currently, and I really want to encourage everybody, so regulatory and industry, to really listen to the patient and bring their voice early on into the drug development process. So what is some of the issues that our scientists obviously have in getting the patient's voice into drug development? Well, we think like scientists. We are scientists, right? So we identify a problem, and we think we can solve the problem without listening to anybody else. I know what the problem is. I can solve it as a scientist. Right? But we don't really have the notion of asking other people what really their needs and insights are for a particular problem. So without taking too much away from these next presentation. Now, I actually attended the design thinking clinical trials, which makes me even more passionate about this. So the part that's missing for us is the empathy part. We're really good in saying, oh, I identify a problem, I know what it is, but are we really asking the patients throughout the drug development process? And we do, in a way, but very late at the stage. And I think that's the problem that we're having. When we look at where we currently listen to patients at advisory committee meetings, that's too late in the stage and in the process, right? Just to say what your assessment of risk-benefit is, you don't really know what they really want in a drug at that point anymore. Well, we started having patient-focused drug development meetings. So we had 15 of those in the past 2 years, and we're expanding on those, really getting the insights of patients into drug development. What are the main symptoms that you have? What are the symptoms that you most care about? What are your issues with treatments? What do you really want from a treatment? And these are conducted on our campus, but I put there the address, the web address. We can also have externally led patient-focused drug development. So it's not only on us all the time to say we want this particular disease area as a patient-focused drug development meeting. You can conduct your own patient-focused drug development meeting. But even then, what can we do in the future? How can we listen to patients in the future? And we see this a lot of times, in our end of phase 2 meetings, companies come to us and say, well, our panel of experts or the experts in the area have told us that this is something that patients want. But we don't really listen to the patients. So it might help really putting in the patient's voice, maybe doing a protocol assessment that you send into FDA and provide data with that. Not just say, well, patients said this is what they want, but show survey data. This was the survey, this is how many patients responded, and so on. So we are data driven, so we can actually look at the data and make an assessment of it rather than just have one statement as this is what the patients want. So it might maybe help before phase 2 development, when you go into developing really how to assess the right dose. That might help when you have patients' voice in there, what they are really looking for and what might be the right dose. So at the end of phase 2 and 2A meetings with the agency. And with that, since we are about to dialogue, and my contact information is on there, so please feel free to contact me afterwards if you have any questions. We're always open, for a two-way dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. Thank you.
So, that was excellent, and you stimulated a few questions for me.
I'm glad that was the whole point, I hope.
You did well. You've had 15 of these patient-focused drug development sessions. As a result of them, what specifically has changed?
And that is a very good question, and we are actually looking into this right now. So what happened is, the way the whole initiative worked, I think, was we asked the patients and we published what patients want. Now we are doing a lot of work in the background. Recently, with the formed patient-focused drug development team, we're actually going back through all the meetings and see what are the common themes that we can identify from those meetings? What do patients really want? And what are follow-up items that we can bring back to the division? Did the division get what they wanted out of the meeting? If they didn't, what can we do to make that happen? What are items that we need to do? Whether it's a scientific conference, is it a guidance, just like the DMD guidance? Is it something where we need to talk about endpoints? So we're actually evaluating after we had a good wealth of information and seeing what are common themes and can bring them back and instill some change within the agency. We have heard about risk aversion within companies, and I would probably say that's true for the agency too. People are very risk averse, so it takes some time, even a small change. What we're trying to do is a small change. Steer a big ship 2 degrees to one side, and at the beginning it might seem, well, the difference is not that large, but when you look at a long period of time, that 2-degree angle might be a large change. It's very disruptive for an agency like that, even a small change.
Okay, so building on that theme, protocol assessment, we all talk about getting patient input into protocols. Some companies do it. I think the companies that do it inconsistently. And again, you have people within organizations that they're reluctant to change. Even though they say they want to serve patients, they're not listening to patients. What if we flip it? Why doesn't the agency say, let's pick one division, one disease area, and inform sponsors that when a protocol is going to come in, we're going to have a group of patients look at the protocol and provide feedback?
And you mentioned a really good point, and it's one of the issues that we are having is we are bound by certain statutes and regulations, right, about proprietary data. So I have thought about this, but we need everybody really to be involved in the process. The agency cannot do it alone. We cannot go back and say, we want to show this protocol to patients because it's your proprietary information. Now, similarly, then the industry is afraid if we show this to patients what the agency is going to say. So it's almost a vicious cycle, and we need to break that cycle, make it into a collaborative cycle where we get a protocol, maybe with survey data already, and we can say, hey, this is what patients want, but maybe you can ask another question, and you can go back and potentially, if the timelines are okay, resurvey that and bring it back to us. So it's a collaborative cycle with all of us together, patients, regulatory agencies, and industry.
Okay.
Have you started to gather any experiences around best practices for getting those patient feedback and insights? I think it's one thing to have a patient advocate or representative at an advisory meeting, but that's one voice, and we find it's hard to get one representative patient who can speak for all. And as Tomas was just sharing a moment ago, there are a lot of different approaches folks can take for patient insights. As you think about some of that future state, what channels can you envision for how you would gather patient feedback?
So it is very difficult to get a diverse voice into patient-focused drug development meeting. For advisory committee, it's even more difficult because depending on who comes, there might be a certain bias. But for a patient-focused drug development meeting, we try to tap into all the different resources that we have. So identify the stakeholders, see which associations might recruit some of their patients. I have been talking to Healthy Vibes, for example, to see how we can tap into their resources, or for the Society for Participatory Medicine, how we can tap into their resources to have a really diverse and balanced voice of the patient in there. I think what we don't want is you have one group of patients in that disease represented and not another. Then it might lead to false conclusions, and I think that's what we don't want to do.
So in terms of, if you could put one request out to CROs, to pharma companies today in terms of what would be most beneficial for them to change to try to move more patient centricity from an agency point of view, what would that be?
I can tell from my own opinion. I was a reviewer for 3 years and then leading a team of clinical pharmacology reviewers, and one thing that comes is a recurring theme is data. If you have data, we can make an assessment of that. If we don't have data, it makes it very hard for us to make any assessment because there's nothing there. So like I mentioned before, if there's just a statement saying this is what patients want, or we have seen that this is what patients want, it makes it very hard for us to assess that. But if you actually can, whether it's in a protocol submission or during a meeting submission, provide that information and say, we have surveyed X number of patients. Here's the breakdown of what they wanted. Here are the survey results, and potentially here are our methods. Then we can review this data and say, hey, this actually makes sense. And there might be, you show your demographics, so we have a balanced population. We can actually review this data and make much more sense out of it than having just a statement there that might not mean much to us in the end. So if I could have one request from my reviewer's perspective, I think would be submit data. I think that makes it then somebody has to review it.